Hello. So today, as promised, I'm going to give you a follow-up review on the Pagani Explorer Homage after I've had it on my wrist for some time. Now, this is a really good watch for 100 USD, but to get to that price point, there have been some compromises that have been made, and you really need to be aware of them before you commit to buying this one, I think. And if you don't like the compromises that have had to be made, then it's worthwhile considering some of the more expensive options that might give you exactly what you're looking for if you can stretch your budget. I picked this watch up in the AliExpress sale, and it took what felt like a glacial age before it actually shipped. Thankfully, once it was on its way, it turned up pretty quickly, and I guess that's one of the benefits of living in Singapore. So I've done an unboxing video already for this watch, and I'll put a link below to that in case you want to watch it. So without further ado, let's get cracking on the watch itself. As you can see, the watch sits fairly well on the wrist and has the dimensions listed on the screen now. I have a 17 centimeter wrist, and I can generally get away with watches up to 43 millimeters in diameter, or perhaps a little more if the lugs are tight to the case. This watch has a 42 millimeter diameter, but it's really nicely proportioned with a 50 mil lug to lug length, so it works reasonably well for me. Surprisingly, given the general flakiness of Pagani's bracelets, this one isn't too bad, especially on a watch that costs just a little over 100 USD. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not brilliant, but it does the job it needs to do fairly well. And generally speaking, I find it fairly comfortable to wear, even when going from Arctic air conditioning in the office to going outside and into the tropical heat. And it has to be said that the quality of the brushing on the links and the bracelet are pretty good for the budget, but they do pick up oil readily, as you can see. So you're going to spend a fair amount of time cleaning the bracelet. So the clasp has 3 levels of micro adjusts, and that's okay, but there's enough space here that they could have added 1 or 2 more holes just to make it that little bit easier to get the perfect fit. Unlike the Explorer 2, this comes with a display case back, and it has to be said that they've put some thought at least into the movements finishing to give you some eye candy here. Okay, well, the finishing is still pretty industrial, but at least they have a decorated and signed rotor and some interesting color choices for a few of the components here to provide some interest. The movement is the Mingju GG5833, and there are a few videos online of this one breaking down after a month or so. However, from what I've seen online, this might not be necessarily a fault with the movement itself, but with the people assembling the watches not keeping things clean during assembly. In other words, the assemblers are leaving a fair amount of gunk in the case and in the movement, and that's eventually going to cause problems. Now, given Pagani's experience and reputation at the budget end of the watch chain, you'd hope that that won't happen with these ones. So let's have a look at the case now. And it has to be said that this is finished to a fairly high standard, and it really does bear a striking resemblance to the Explorer 2's case. As you can see, the polish sections are very distinct from the brush sections, and the larger polish sections really do have an almost mirror-like finish to them. So all in all, this is a very well finished case for a watch at the $100 price point. So on to the first compromise here. While the watch is rated to 100 meters water resistance, I'm not sure how much trust I'd place in that given the lack of a screw down crown here. So it does make it relatively easy to manually wind. And when you move the crown to the first position, winding it in one direction moves the date, and then moving it in the second direction moves the GMT hand, as you can see here. Now that's quite different to the Explorer 2, where both of those actions imply a separate position for the crown, which means that you don't have the possibility of getting mixed up between trying to change the date and the GMT hand. And in addition, it's the hour hand that moves independently on the Explorer 2, not the GMT hand, which I feel is a little bit more intuitive and, for me at least, makes it easier to use. Full disclosure, I've never had an Explorer 2. However, I've had Rolex GMTs in the past, and the mechanisms are basically identical between the two watches. Nevertheless, it's relatively easy to set the GMT hand on the Pagani to whatever time zone you want to follow with it. On to the Lume now, and this is fairly decent and quite blue, but I'm not entirely sure it's the nicest blue I've ever seen in a watch. And as you can see from the video here, it doesn't hang on all that well over a 10-minute test period. A few further coats of Lume would have really helped here, but it would have pushed up the price of the watch. And so I guess this is one of the compromises here. If you really like Lume, then maybe this watch isn't for you and you might have to look for one of the other options that are out there. And another compromise, for me at least, feels like the hands. I mean, the dial itself looks really good, but for some reason the hands feel just a little bit undersized for the dial. Now that might just be my personal preference, or it may be that they're recalling one of the older references of the Explorer 2, but it might be easier to see what I'm talking about if I compare it to a Submariner. Sorry, I don't have an Explorer available to make the comparison directly. But when you have these two side by side, you can kind of see that the Pagani's hands feel a little bit small when compared to the proportions of the Submariner's hands and its case. But all in all, this Pagani feels and looks like a very good watch for the money that you're paying. And there's a bit of a bonus here in that you're probably not going to have to change the bracelet straight away, though you might still want to do that in the future if you're keeping this for a fairly long time. However, not everyone seems to get on with this Pagani. One of the commenters on my unboxing video said that they were disappointed with this watch and that they had instead upgraded for a Christopher Ward Sealander. I guess that would be the C63 Sealander GMT that I'm showing on screen now, but that's going to cost you around about 1,000 USD. So it costs about 10 times more than the Pagani. Are you going to get a better watch for the additional money? Most probably. I haven't seen the Sealander, but it looks a fantastic watch overall. But are you going to get 10 times more watch for the money? Probably not. Though the overall level of finishing of the case and bracelet will probably be better, and it does have a Swiss movement that you'd hope will be more reliable than the Mingju. So in summary, if you're in the market for an Explorer style watch, but don't want to spend a lot of money, then I'd recommend giving the Pagani a go. At worst, it'll give you time to decide whether this style of watch is for you, and at best, it could easily become your daily beater. So thanks very much for watching this video. If you liked, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below and leave a comment too. And until next time, thanks very much.